Good evening. Tonight, we bring you an incredible, real-life story about an unexpected meeting, a life-changing opportunity, and the power of kindness in a world that often forgets its importance. It happened on a rainy Friday night at Riverside Bistro, a small, family-run restaurant in the heart of Oregon. The place was packed. Locals, travelers, and business people filled the candlelit dining area. The sound of silverware clinking against plates blended with soft conversations, creating the usual warm, bustling atmosphere. For Ethan Carter, a 28-year-old waiter working the late shift, it was just another long, exhausting night. Ethan had worked at the Riverside Bistro for 5 years. It wasn't his passion, it was a paycheck. But lately, it felt like more than that. It felt like a trap. The same routine, the same frustrations. Serving tables, dealing with rude customers, and pretending to smile even when he was running on fumes. He had dreams once, big ones. Culinary school, maybe even opening his own place one day. But dreams cost money, and money was something he barely had enough of to keep the lights on. So, when the restaurant's heavy wooden door creaked open at 8:15 p.m. and a man stepped in, Ethan barely spared him a glance. Just another late-night customer. The man, dressed in a plain black sweater and faded jeans, walked in with an air of quiet confidence. There was nothing flashy about him, nothing that screamed attention, and yet something about him seemed different. The hostess greeted him without much interest. "We're fully booked tonight," she said, flipping through the reservations. But there was something about his tone, his presence, that made her pause. "Table for one, please." She hesitated. Most people would have complained, pushed back, or walked out. But this man simply nodded, stepping aside without a fuss. Across the room, Ethan was clearing a table when he noticed the exchange. "Another tourist," he muttered under his breath, probably going to order water, a salad, and leave a 5% tip. His coworker, Clara, nudged him. "You're so cynical," she teased. "Come on, he looks harmless." "They always do," Ethan grumbled, shaking his head. Minutes later, the hostess called over to Ethan. "Table 7 is open. Take him there." With a sigh, Ethan grabbed a menu and walked over. His customer service smile, strained, forced, was barely convincing. "Right this way, sir." The man followed quietly, his eyes scanning the room as if he were taking everything in. Ethan sat him at the worst table in the house, a small, cramped seat near the kitchen door where the constant movement of waiters and clatter of dishes would make it impossible to enjoy a meal. "This is what we've got tonight. Hope it's good enough," Ethan smirked. The man didn't react. Instead, he gave a small, polite smile. "This will do just fine. Thank you." Ethan dropped the menu onto the table with a little less care than usual. "I'll give you a minute to look this over. Let me know when you're ready." Without another word, he turned and walked away, barely acknowledging the man. He wasn't rude exactly, but he wasn't warm either. Just another customer, he thought. Nothing special. Behind the counter, Clara leaned in and whispered, "You could at least try to be nice." Ethan scoffed, grabbing a tray of drinks. Why bother? He's probably just some random guy passing through. Yet, something about him nagged at him. Why did he seem familiar? Shoving the thought aside, Ethan returned to the table a few minutes later, his tone carefully neutral. "Have you decided, sir?" The man glanced up from the menu, his expression unreadable. "I'll start with a bowl of the clam chowder, and maybe you can recommend something for the main course?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You want my recommendation?" He crossed his arms slightly. Sure. The burgers are popular, or you could try the steak, though it's probably not what you're used to." There was an edge to his voice, a subtle jab, but the man didn't react. "Steak sounds good," the man said. "Medium rare, please." Ethan scribbled down the order and walked back to the kitchen muttering under his breath, "Steak and chowder. Classic." As the man waited for his food, he pulled out his phone, scrolling quietly. Across the restaurant, whispers started to build. At first, just a glance, a hushed conversation. Then, a diner at a nearby table casually pulled out their phone and snapped a quick picture. "Hey, doesn't he look like—" a woman whispered. "Nah, no way," her partner replied. "Why would someone like him be here?" But more people started noticing. The murmurs grew louder. Clara, now watching closely, nudged Ethan again. "I think that guy's someone famous." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Oh, come on, Clara. Famous people don't show up in places like this dressed like that." Clara smirked. "I don't know. Something about him feels different. You really don't recognize him?" Ethan shook his head. "Nope, and I don't care. He's table 7, that's it." Still, he couldn't help but sneak another glance. By now, more people were looking. A couple was whispering behind their hands. Another diner had their phone out, pretending to check messages while angling the camera just right. Ethan frowned. What was going on? He grabbed the bowl of chowder from the kitchen and walked it over, setting it down with just a bit too much force. Some of the soup sloshed over the edge. "Enjoy," Ethan said curtly before walking away. The man didn't flinch. Instead, he calmly picked up a napkin, wiped the spill, and smiled faintly to himself, almost like he found the whole situation amusing. By now, the restaurant was buzzing. And Ethan? He was about to find out exactly why. Ethan could no longer ignore it, the strange energy spreading through the restaurant. More and more people were sneaking glances at table 7. Some whispered. Others exchanged knowing looks. A few even attempted to discreetly snap photos. By now, Clara had fully abandoned her work and was openly watching. "Ethan," she whispered urgently, "you have to see it now. Who do you think he is?" Ethan rolled his eyes but finally gave in, taking a longer, more deliberate look at the man. His face, strong features, familiar eyes, and effortless calmness. And then it clicked. No way. A knot formed in his stomach as he realized why the man seemed so familiar. His heart pounded. His stomach turned. The man sitting at table 7 eating his steak without a care in the world was none other than Keanu Reeves. Ethan froze. The realization hit him like a brick wall. He had spent the last hour completely dismissing Keanu Reeves. The sarcasm, the cold treatment, the barely concealed irritation, every single moment replayed in his mind. The worst part, Keanu had never once reacted. He hadn't corrected Ethan. He hadn't drawn attention to himself. He had let it happen. And now, the entire restaurant knew, except for Ethan until now. Panic set in. Clara saw the change in Ethan's face and grinned. "Oh, you see it now, don't you?" Ethan swallowed hard. "You're joking." Clara smirked. "Look around, Ethan. No one can stop staring." Ethan glanced around. She was right. People were either whispering or watching in stunned silence. A tourist at a nearby table had pulled up an image of Keanu Reeves on their phone, holding it up to compare. It was him. The same Keanu Reeves who had starred in some of the biggest films of all time. The same Keanu Reeves known for being kind, humble, and one of Hollywood's most beloved figures. And Ethan had treated him like an inconvenience. He felt his entire body go cold. Then, as if the night couldn't get worse, the tourist who had been taking pictures finally stood up and walked straight to Ethan. "Hey, man," the tourist said, barely containing his excitement. "You do know who that is, right?" Ethan's mouth went dry. The tourist didn't wait for an answer. He turned his phone toward Ethan, displaying the Google search results. A crisp, high-resolution photo of Keanu Reeves stared back at him. Ethan stared at the screen, then back at the man at table 7, who, despite the growing attention, remained perfectly calm. This wasn't happening. But it was. Keanu glanced up at Ethan at that exact moment, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. And suddenly, Ethan felt like the biggest idiot on the planet. Ethan stood frozen. His entire body felt like it had turned to stone. Keanu Reeves had been sitting in his section for over an hour, and he had treated him like just another impatient customer, maybe worse. His stomach twisted into knots. What was he supposed to do now? Apologize? Pretend like he hadn't just realized? Clara nudged him, barely containing her laughter. Well, this is awkward. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. His feet felt heavy as he made his way back to table 7, his mind scrambling for something, anything, to say. Keanu, still completely composed, set down his fork and looked up as Ethan approached. "Everything okay with the steak?" Ethan asked, his voice tighter than he intended. Keanu wiped his mouth with a napkin, then nodded. "It's perfect, thank you." That was it. No sarcasm, no gloating, no, "Do you know who I am?" Just a calm, polite response. Ethan shifted awkwardly. He cleared his throat. "Can I, get you anything else?" Keanu tilted his head slightly as if studying him. "Actually, I'd like to see the dessert menu." Ethan nodded quickly, retreating to the counter. Clara was waiting for him, arms crossed, a smirk plastered on her face. "So, how's it feel serving Neo?" Ethan shot her a glare. "Not now, Clara." She snorted but handed him the menu. "You should probably do something before you regret it." Ethan exhaled slowly. She was right. But what could he say? "Sorry I treated you like a nobody?" That hardly seemed appropriate. Returning to the table, Ethan handed Keanu the menu with far more care than he had with the soup earlier. "Our desserts are made fresh daily. The chocolate lava cake is a favorite." Keanu glanced at the menu before looking back up. "That sounds great. I'll have that." Ethan scribbled down the order and turned to leave, but Keanu's voice stopped him. "You've had a long day, haven't you?" Ethan froze. Slowly, he turned back around. What?" Keanu smiled faintly. "It shows. But you're doing a good job." For a moment, Ethan didn't know how to respond. He had spent the last 2 hours giving Keanu Reeves the most unimpressive service of his life, and the man was sitting there telling him he was doing a good job. Was this some kind of cosmic joke? "Thanks," Ethan muttered before walking away. Back at the counter, he rubbed his temples. The whole situation felt unreal. Clara, still watching with amusement, placed the dessert order before nudging him again. "You do realize he's like the nicest guy on the planet, right?" Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, I'm getting that." Minutes later, he delivered the dessert to the table, carefully setting it down. "Chocolate lava cake," Ethan said, forcing a small, apologetic smile. "I, promise not to spill anything this time." Keanu chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Much appreciated." For the first time all night, Ethan laughed. A real, unforced laugh. Maybe this wasn't a total disaster after all. As the restaurant slowly emptied, the tension in the air finally began to settle. Most diners had finished their meals, but Table 7 remained occupied. Keanu Reeves took his time, finishing his dessert with the same quiet ease he had shown all evening. Ethan, however, was still reeling. His mind spun in a dozen different directions. He had spent years assuming the worst about people who passed through the restaurant, letting his frustration cloud how he treated others. And tonight, of all nights, it had backfired in the biggest way possible. The worst part, Keanu hadn't treated him badly in return. If anything, he had done the opposite. Ethan took a deep breath and finally made a decision. He wasn't going to let the night end like this. Grabbing a fresh cup of coffee from behind the counter, he made his way over to Table 7. Mr. Reeves," Ethan said hesitantly. Keanu looked up, his expression warm but unreadable. Ethan cleared his throat. "I just wanted to, apologize. For earlier." Keanu set down his spoon and leaned back slightly, giving Ethan his full attention. "You don't have to apologize," he said. Ethan shook his head. "No, I do. I judged you the second you walked in. I was rude, impatient. I just assumed—" He exhaled, embarrassed by his own words. "I assumed you were nobody." Keanu was silent for a moment, then smiled. And now? Ethan swallowed. Now I feel like an idiot. Keanu chuckled, the sound light and genuine. Don't be too hard on yourself, he said. You're not the first person to assume things about someone based on a first impression. Ethan hesitated, then gestured to the coffee in his hand. Would you like a refill? Keanu nodded. That would be great. Thank you. Ethan poured the coffee, his hands feeling steadier than they had all night. When he set the cup down, Keanu looked at him thoughtfully. You don't like this job very much, do you? Ethan stiffened slightly, caught off guard. I mean, it pays the bills, he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. Keanu tilted his head. But it's not what you want. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. No, not really. He hesitated, then, before he could stop himself, admitted the truth. I always wanted to go to culinary school, open my own place someday, but life doesn't always work out that way. Keanu studied him for a moment before speaking. What's stopping you? Ethan laughed dryly. Money, time, responsibility, take your pick. Keanu took a slow sip of his coffee. What if you had an opportunity to change that? Ethan frowned, confused. What do you mean? Keanu set his cup down. What if I told you that sometimes opportunities come from the most unexpected places? Ethan stared at him, his heart pounding. He had no idea that in the next few minutes his entire life was about to change. Ethan's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure if Keanu was just making conversation or if there was something more behind those words. Unexpected places? Ethan repeated, his voice careful. Keanu nodded, taking another slow sip of his coffee. Sometimes the right door appears when you least expect it. The question is, would you walk through it? Ethan frowned slightly. I mean, if I had the chance, sure. But it's not that simple. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? Ethan hesitated. I don't know. He exhaled, shaking his head. Look, I'd love to go to culinary school. I'd love to do something that actually means something to me. But real life doesn't just hand you opportunities. Keanu studied him for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. He placed it on the table, sliding it toward Ethan. This is the head of a culinary program in Los Angeles, Keanu said. A friend of mine. They have scholarship opportunities for people who are serious about it. If you want a shot, call them. Ethan stared at the card like it might disappear if he blinked. You're serious? Ethan finally asked. Keanu smiled. I wouldn't have said it if I wasn't. Ethan picked up the card, running his thumb over the raised lettering. It felt heavy in his hands, like it meant something bigger than just a piece of paper. I don't know what to say, Ethan admitted. You don't have to say anything now, Keanu replied. Just think about it. Ethan nodded slowly, his mind racing. By now, the restaurant was nearly empty. The last few diners were finishing their meals, and the kitchen staff had begun closing down for the night. Keanu glanced at the clock, then reached for the check. Ethan moved instinctively. It's on the house, he blurted. Keanu chuckled. That's kind, but I insist. He placed a generous tip on the table. More than generous. As he stood, he met Ethan's gaze one final time. Whatever you decide, don't let fear be the thing that stops you. Ethan swallowed hard. He nodded, unable to form words. Keanu smiled, gave him a small nod of farewell, and walked toward the door. Ethan watched as he disappeared into the rainy night. For a long time he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at the card in his hand. Clara finally broke the silence. So, that just happened. Ethan let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, it really did. He slipped the card into his pocket where it stayed for the rest of the night. Because for the first time in years, Ethan didn't just feel stuck. He felt like there was a way out. And maybe, just maybe, he'd be brave enough to take it. Weeks later, he was no longer just a small-town waiter. He was part of a creative team, traveling, meeting incredible people, and helping share their stories. And as he stood on a rooftop in Los Angeles looking out over the city, he realized something. One moment can change everything. Now, here's the question for you. What if your moment is waiting right around the corner? What if one unexpected encounter, one leap of faith could change everything? Do you believe in taking chances? Drop a yes in the comments if you do. And if this story inspired you, hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible stories that remind us all of what's possible. Because sometimes, life's biggest opportunities come from the most unexpected places. This is Alex, signing off.